ProKennex's new lineup is genuinely stunning. Not only is the paint job beautiful and unique, but the rackets are of very high quality, offering a technology that nobody else has. While other rackets have their own dampening technology in the layups, they're all kind of trying to do the same thing, but in a way they can call their own. And I know I'm not the only one who feels these attempts from all the different brands are often, if not always, pretty meaningless and redundant. ProKennex is entirely unique in this way. Their technology is nothing like the rest. The goal of competing racket technologies is generally to find some harmonious balance between arm friendliness by minimizing harsh vibrations and not completely disconnecting you from the racket. And to me, it's pretty funny to watch all these racket companies go so back and forth on these technologies. They'll come out with whatever the latest and greatest is, often disappointing or frustrating customers. First one to come to mind is Countervail from Wilson. That got discontinued a little while ago. More recently, we have Auxetic from Head, which also received a lot of criticism. They were quick to try and fix that with the 2.0 version, but that also didn't really seem to super win over the consumers. Yonex also changed and rebranded their V-Core Pro lineup, a lineup which was often criticized for being overly mushy, soft, a criticism that I totally agree with. And the Percept lineup, which comes in to replace the V-Core Pros, which had VDM in it, vibration dampening mesh, was replaced with something they are calling the servo filter on the Percept line of rackets. This is another dampening technology. It's concentrated around the throat of the racket, and the Percept lineup has gained somewhat of a reputation for cracking right where the material is located. Is that a coincidence? It's hard to say. And perhaps the funniest of all to me is the Rafa Origin racket from Babolat, because one of the marketable traits of that racket is not having any vibration dampening tech at all. And their reasoning for that is that pros prefer to maximize connectivity to the ball. And that brings into question the desire to have vibration dampening tech at all. And how frustrating is it that racket companies are so back and forth? I mean, it makes one wonder, are they ever going to get it right? Did you ever get it right? Or does none of that actually matter very much, and it's all just some rabbit hole that is indefinitely disorienting, keeping the consumers on their toes, waiting for the latest and greatest thing? Because sometimes they'll innovate something, but it turns out that innovation is actually more disappointing, and then they'll go back and talk about how they're bringing some of the things back that people liked. And there's sort of this consumer response of like, oh great, bring that back. But then it's like, why did they try to fix something that isn't broken in the first place? And then we have Babolat over here marketing a racket without vibration dampening tech because that's what the pros really want. And there's a lot of implied dishonesty across the board too, because if Babolat is saying that this lack of vibration dampening tech is what the pros actually want, but they're having pros endorse rackets that they're not really using, which is super the case for like all the brands. I mean, racket companies are in the business of selling rackets, so I don't necessarily blame them for keeping consumers on their toes. But the dishonesty and gaslighting to some degree just feels a little heavy-handed. And with somebody who has their pulse on the tennis culture to some degree, I know that a lot of people feel this way. They're tired of how muted rackets are. They're tired of meaningless technologies. I mean, most of these technologies are just some kind of barely patentable difference in material or layup or even just the location, just different enough that you can actually call it something that you can pretend is a technology and claim as your own. And I think the fact that a lot of these companies have never stuck with these things very long is a pretty clear indicator of, one, it was never really real or that great in the first place if you're able to innovate past it so quickly. And two, well, clearly they weren't so great that the companies ever really decided to stick with it for a very long time. These are typically things that get phased out within a generation or two of rackets, and when the new thing comes in, it's the latest and greatest. And the cycle kind of rinses and repeats. Now, something I really respect about ProKennex is that they don't play that game at all. In fact, they don't even really advertise any kind of vibration dampening tech in the layup. Their technology is completely different, and they've stood by it for a very long time. And the brilliant thing is that these rackets honestly are more arm-friendly than your stereotypical arm-friendly rackets without feeling that way. They're not this overly mushy, super old-school flexy type of racket, which ultimately just bends at impact, leaving you with little to no power and sometimes little to no control because they're so flexy. Instead, these rackets deal with the forces that may cause arm issues in a completely different way, and that is their kinetic technology. This is something that nobody else has. What kinetic technology essentially is, there are these small chambers located in various areas of the racket. It kind of depends on the racket you're getting. This one also has it in the handle here. You have something that can be described as movable mass. And what you have inside of here is little bits of tungsten bearings, tungsten powders, in tiny isolated little chambers that when you are swinging the racket, and you can hear this inside of here, right? It's not really that loud, but if I bring it right up to the microphone, you can hear it, is charged as potential energy when you're swinging, right? You can see or imagine that these balls, bearings, powders, etc., this weight would be charged as potential energy. And then when they meet the tennis ball, boom, they will slam to the other side of the racket, essentially pushing you through the ball. It's subtle, it's meaningful, it's very different than everything else. And I honestly feel like it's one of the only technologies in a racket that's even worth being called a technology. Everything else just feels like a lie. And I know I'm not the only person that feels that way. What I'm describing, by the way, is very similar to what is known as a dead blow hammer. Dead blow hammers have a bunch of movable mass inside, and you swing it. Upon hitting a nail or whatever it is, all of this weight comes flooding down at the moment of contact and pushes through with a lot of energy. And this kinetic tech uses the same concept, although in a more subtle way, to stabilize the racket. And it gives you more plow through because the weight is moving. It is more productive and energy efficient in that way than static weight. So what you essentially get is a racket that has characteristics on contact of a racket that is actually more heavy, but only during the moment of contact. That's really when you want the extra weight, isn't it? So what you get is a racket that doesn't have to play or have the compromises of something stereotypically arm-friendly. You can have a racket that is firmer and more arm-friendly than your typical arm-friendly rackets. And the rackets which are more flexy have the extra penetration and plow-through that those rackets lack because of the kinetic technology. And I was pointing out earlier that a lot of rackets are so back and forth on the technologies that they embrace and market. Kinetic has been a racket technology that ProKennex has stuck with for a very long time. And that to me shows that the company actually came out with something worth sticking with. They believe in it. But as I've described, it's very real. Let me grab another racket here that really tells the story of how I got to ProKennex in the first place. Long story short, I took my dampener off at some point, and this is around the time I was messing around with like Pure Aero 98s, great racket, and the Dunlop SXs, the 300 and the 300 Tour. I played without a dampener and suddenly noticed, wow, there is a lot more feel. And that put me down this rabbit hole looking for feel. I tried all these different rackets, different tensions, different strings, and there's a video about that journey, but the long story short was that I started to piece together how you can actually begin to optimize your setup for feel. Feel quickly became a sensation that I was compromising less and less on. And that was a high priority ever since I started to put that into context for my tennis rackets. And somewhere along on that journey for looking for more feel, I decided to take a look at ProKennex more seriously. They were kind of a quirky, weird racket brand that I felt like you might stumble upon if you are on some journey to fix tennis elbow. But after learning more about the kinetic technology and seeing for myself how good the feel was on these rackets, and coming to understand that ProKennex doesn't have a bunch of mushy vibration muting tech in their layup, and instead they lean on this completely different and unique technology that is nothing like anything else the other rackets have, I quickly fell in love. I was fascinated. I could feel and see the results. I could understand the potential that it brought to the table as far as what's possible to expect from a racket. Anyway, somewhere on that journey for ProKennex rackets specifically, I really meshed with the Black Ace 105. This is the Black Ace Pro. It's a 97-inch, 1619, control, precision, touch, pretty good spin. And the same goes for this, but it's 100 square inches. This is just the regular Black Ace, and it comes in 3 weight classes. This is the 315. Little bigger head size, slightly thicker beam. That kind of has the differences you might expect. Amazing rackets, truly. But the racket that made the most sense to me, and maybe still does, is the Black Ace 105. And I'm not really a stranger to larger head sizes. I understand that the stereotype that larger racket head sizes typically get really comes from most larger head sizes being absolutely ridiculous tennis rackets. They're way too light. They are head heavy, but also like 9 ounces. They often have weird string patterns. The beams are super thick. They're terrible rackets to use if you're an inexperienced player. They actually just might be a terrible racket for pretty much anybody. Personally, I would never recommend those rackets, but I understand that those rackets have kind of defined the way that larger head sizes are perceived. And it's become this thing that's kind of in the conventional wisdom of tennis culture now that any racket over 100 is just for beginners. And that's often true, but I think I broke that stereotype down because, I'm definitely the type of person to look past the conventional wisdom and kind of see for myself. And I think 2 rackets that I was able to take seriously was the SW102. That was Serena Williams endorsed racket. Cool racket. It was an 18 by 19, very blade-like otherwise, but maybe a little stiffer, longer. Anyway, that racket and the Blade 104 showed me that there are rackets that are worth being taken seriously with a bigger head. And it also showed me what some of the benefits of a bigger head are. So I was quickly able to dismantle this stereotype for myself and personally discover what it's actually like to seriously take a larger head size. And on paper, you would never think that this racket is built in some ridiculous way for beginners. Literally the only spec on here that would make you think that maybe is the 105 head size, which I should remind you is only 5 inches bigger than 100. Do you think that's really enough that it should scare you away from taking this as a serious racket? If it is, I feel like those people are too easily steered by conventional wisdom and marketing. It's not this racket's fault that larger head sizes are perceived a certain way in the tennis culture. It's not. If anything, this is the racket to make you reconsider everything you think about larger head sizes. And this video is not really supposed to be about the Black Ace 105, but let me say something real quick, all right? Larger head sizes, they offer a little bit more power than a smaller one, right? Fair. But this is not a thick beam racket with a big head. It's kind of a middle beam racket. And as I said, the layup doesn't really compromise the feel. So you get a lot of feel, you don't get too much power, but you do get a little bit of power back from the larger head. And so I would say the power balance of this racket is like right where a lot of people want it. More advanced players, etc. It's not an excessively launchy racket. Like this 105 is a much more predictable racket, less launchy, and maybe even just less powerful in general than like the EZO 98. That is an erratic racket, but it's a 98 and people are gonna think, oh, it's a 98, so it's kind of a control racket. Like those are just assumptions without putting anything into context, okay? And if you're gonna think that way about this racket, you're gonna totally miss what it is. So the power on here is just right. And you also get a nicer, bigger sweet spot, and you get some free stability just from having a bigger head. Similar to extending a racket increases its swing weight, enlarging the head size will increase its twist weight and therefore its stability. And you can do that without adding weight. So you get this free stability that comes from the size of the head, not from the weight. Typically you have to add weight to get stability. So that's a clever thing to consider when thinking about bigger head sizes. So this racket actually gives you really good feel, bigger sweet spot, good stability. It's not too heavy, it's still maneuverable. I mean, the list of interesting convention breaking things about this racket just goes on. And I get a lot of spin with this racket, but I can also play heavy baseline rallies. I can also do some really, really sneaky, nasty drop shots, and I like my net game with this racket. Honestly, this is one of the least compromising rackets I've ever played with by far. And part of what opens up the door to achieve that in one racket is this Kinetic technology. And as far as the racket material and so on goes, I think the two things that really separate ProKennex and kind of put them above the competition, honestly, is the Kinetic technology and the lack of muting material in the layups. So the connectivity, the feel on all the rackets, regardless of what kind of racket it is targeting to compete with, the feel is really good. And the arm comfort and the plow through, it's gonna be better than anything else when you're comparing things gram for gram. Anyway, let's get back to the bigger picture here. ProKennex is positioning themselves to make a meaningful comeback in 2025. This lineup is amazing. The paint job, obviously stunning. One of the coolest paint jobs, honestly, to probably ever happen on a tennis racket. I haven't met a single person who disagrees with that claim. These rackets are beautiful. They've also tightened up the quality control beyond industry standard. It might even be competitive with Yonex. ProKennex has a dedicated lineup of craftsmen at their factories that they call Ace Station. So it is their finest craftsmen working at the Ace Station who are making these Black Ace rackets. And that strategy is part of how they are able to tighten the tolerance. And just so we're clear, the whole Black Ace lineup is really dedicated for more intermediate to advanced players. And within that threshold of players, there are a few variations of rackets. So the goal is to target a wide audience within the more advanced threshold of tennis players. So if you want control, spin, touch, feel, and maybe a lower launch angle but still good spin, these two rackets are incredibly competitive with rackets like the Pure Strikes anything from the Percept lineup, even the Renya or Regna, as some people say, from Yonex, Head Gravities, Head Prestige. You get the picture? And again, these rackets belong in that family of racket styles, but they're coming at it with the technology that nobody else has. And I'm going to say one really, really interesting fact here in a second, but just hold with me. So if you want to maximize precision, touch, feel, etc., the kind of things you would look for in the rackets I just mentioned, highly recommend the Black Ace Pro or the standard Black Ace, and you can kind of pick and choose from there. But those will be your go-to rackets for that type of racket. But if you're looking to optimize for spin and you want a little bit more power and you still want great touch, feel, etc., I think the Black Ace 105 is highly worth considering. I mean, I absolutely love this racket. This is my go-to racket. This is the racket that stands above all the rest for me. And the rackets that set the bar for things like spin, but not too much power and not bad control. You know, the kind of compromises somebody might look for in today's modern baseline spin-heavy game. Pure Aero 98 set the bar, and then the Dunlop SXs took the spin up a little bit more than anything from the Pure Aero lineups, and that definitely got my attention. Slight compromise on control there, but they were a little bit more comfortable than the Pure Aeros. So with the increased spin and comfort, I figured I could kind of work around the slight difference in control there because I felt like the gains in spin made enough sense for me to go that way. Point being is that I had a very high bar set by those rackets for spin, control, and comfort, especially from that Dunlop. And this racket meets all those bars and exceeds some of them. I genuinely didn't think it was possible. And again, part of the trick to achieving that is in the technology unique to ProKennex, but also the fact that this is a 105. It's a fascinating racket. I don't think there's anything like this. And I'm really glad that I can get all of that and not have to compromise on the top spin I got used to with rackets like the Pure Aeros and the Dunlop SXs, which sit kind of at the top of the food chain as far as top spin goes. So check these rackets out. I have a 10% off coupon code for you when you go to ProKennex.com and order one of these. They're beautiful, the quality is high, the racket technology is actually real, it's meaningful, it's interesting, it's different, and the paint jobs are obviously like nothing else. I also want to shout out one quality about ProKennex rackets I really appreciate. They're not one of those big brands, which you can all name. They're not playing that game of maximizing profit on every racket by minimizing costs and focusing money on advertising, essentially. These companies are paying so much money to maintain the interest and loyalty of the players you all know and love, like Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, and now we got Sinner and Alcaraz. How much do you think it costs these companies to keep those players using their rackets? Because those endorsement deals are so important to the brand visibility that it's probably worth the cost. And the racket companies can make up that cost by selling enough volume and cutting corners where they can, like on quality control, for example. Or maybe they make a bunch of meaningless changes to make it seem as though the new rackets are actually better than the last. And of course, having the top players using or appearing to use the latest and greatest thing creates this sense of urgency to switch. And the big brands know that. The big brands have the money to play that game. That is not the game that ProKennex is playing, and that's not the game that they're interested in playing. ProKennex is a brand that focuses their money on the quality of the product. That's how they're going to stay competitive. They're going to offer you something better at a competitive price, and they're not going to blow their money on a bunch of dishonest endorsement deals. The vast majority of tennis players, especially the professionals at the top of their game, they are absolutely not using the racket that their racket appears to be. Most of the tennis players on the tour stick with the racket that they turned pro with, and the company that they're sponsored by will continue to make that racket for them, but they will keep painting it like the newest racket. And that's a relationship that can cost tens of millions of dollars per professional top player. And that's the kind of money that ProKennex is not wasting. And I'm honored to say that I have developed a closer relationship with ProKennex in the past months, which is perfect for me because this is my favorite racket. That field journey that I was on and mentioned, which there is a video on, I'll link it here, brought me to this racket. It put me on a path to appreciate things that ProKennex offers where other companies don't. And if that's the kind of company you want to support, you can use my code to get 10% off of any of these Black Ace rackets. In fact, it should work for anything on their websites. If you want to check out their strings or their bags, go for it. And if you're anything like me, you might be hungry for some authenticity in the marketing side of these tennis racket companies, which is another reason I'm so aligned and honored to be partnered with ProKennex. Speaking of companies who aren't blowing their budget on advertising and passing those costs down to you, I want to thank today's video partner, Mint Mobile. You guys know I love to hunt for better deals without sacrificing on performance. Mint Mobile is premium wireless, offered at a more competitive price by operating entirely online, passing those savings down to you while also using the nation's largest 5G network. Major wireless networks want you to think it's a hassle to switch, but it really only takes 15 minutes. And you probably have everything with you right now to start saving. Great plans start at only $15 a month. And if you need or want a new phone, they have some good deals. You're not locked into any expensive contracts with Mint Mobile. They'll even show you your data usage so you can pick the plan that makes the most sense for you, even if it means they make less money. No storefronts, no salespeople, no millions of dollars blown on a Super Bowl commercial. It's just premium wireless with premium savings. So if you want to start saving now, you can click on the link here on screen or down below to get Mint Mobile for just $15 a month when you get a 3-month plan. And yes, you can keep the same number you're using right now. All right, well, if you've made it this far, I did promise you guys a fun fact. Here it is. ProKennex, back in their heyday, used to manufacture many of the top-selling rackets for companies like Head, Wilson, and Prince, at a time when all of those companies were at the top of the mountain, including ProKennex. So just imagine that ProKennex is a competitive racket on the marketplace, right up there with Wilson, Head, and Prince, who they're all in competition with, right? They're all in competition with each other, along with other brands that I didn't necessarily name, but how weird do you think it felt to be making rackets for the company that you're in competition with, or having your rackets made by the company you're in competition with? Naturally, it created some tension. So there's a whole crazy history there and more that I'm going to get into in a future video. I want to tell the crazy story of ProKennex, and I will. But my point is, what do you guys think it says about ProKennex if many of the biggest companies at the time were relying on them for manufacturing? Naturally, those companies did want to get away from their dependency on ProKennex and did eventually, but it's a crazy story. I look forward to telling it. And I guess my whole point is that ProKennex was never really as much of a racket brand as they were like a manufacturing company. They just happened to have a racket brand, and they happened to be really competitive in the market at the time that their customers were also their competitors. It's a very weird history. And you know what? I will say this in this video, because earlier I was talking about how so many of the technologies were just kind of meaningless. Well, as I said, it was a marketing strategy to come up with something that was patentable and somehow marketable in the near future as better than whatever it is that you're selling right now. This is something that ProKennex was called upon to do for companies like Wilson and Prince and Head. My point is that ProKennex was capable and talented enough to come up with ways to create something that qualified as technology and was unique enough to be patentable. But at the end of the day, ProKennex never sold their Kinetic technology. This is something that they always held for themselves. And I think the fact that they have stood by it and never sold it speaks volumes to how much the company actually believes in it. And I think the fact that those major companies were relying on ProKennex at one point to manufacture for them also speaks volumes to the caliber, quality, and respect that ProKennex had in the tennis industry at that time. But ProKennex was a respected brand in the fabrication industry just as a whole. So there is a lot of history to get into so that you guys have more context as to what and who ProKennex is, but they're a way bigger deal than what their impression in the tennis world currently is. But they make my favorite racket. Their technology is genuinely amazing and their paint jobs are stunning. I highly urge you to try one of these. I think they're amazing. I think so many of you guys are going to love these rackets. And I think there's going to be a lot of people that once they try these, it's going to be hard to just go back to a regular racket, which really only has fake technologies. The Kinetic stuff is very real. I hope you guys feel it for yourselves. I'm sure on paper and in my explanation, it makes some sense, but there's really nothing like trying it for yourself. And I hope you do. If you guys get a racket, let me know which one you got, and when you get it, let me know what you think. And if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. As I said, I'm pretty close to the company, so if you guys have some crazy, more in-depth questions, feel free to ask. Maybe I can get you some answers. But as usual, I will do my best to respond to everybody in the comments. And yeah, you can also say hi on Instagram. My handle there is the same. And yeah, the content there is a little bit different. But thanks again for watching. I did, between filming, string this up with Restring Zero and Wasabi in the crosses. Oh wait, no, I didn't. It's another racket. But this also does actually have that same combo in here. And I will be continuing to test these and getting to know these so I can speak on them in better detail. And yeah, I suppose that's it for now. Don't forget to get your 10% off. Use my code at ProKennex.com, and Happy New Year and happy hitting. I will see you guys in the next video. I'll leave some videos here or something that I think you might be interested in if you liked this video. And if you did like it, and if you want to support the channel, subscribe. Subscribing is always a great help to the channel, and I will leave it at that. All right, thank you guys for watching. See you in the next one. All right, that's a wrap. First video 2025, baby, let's go.